All right. We're about a minute past the hour, and we've got a lot of great stuff to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar around navigating workplace conflict, tools for productive conversations, part two in our conflict and communication series. My name is Sydney Axelrod. I am the Associate Director of Workforce Development for ACU's STAR² Center. And thank you all so much for joining us today. For those of you who are not familiar, we are here on behalf of ACU, or Association of Clinicians for the Underserved. We were founded nearly 30 years ago now by alumni of the National Health Service Corps, and we have tons of wonderful programming really designed to support the workforce at community health centers. So lots of wonderful things going on at ACU. When you have some time, please feel free to take a visit to clinicians.org and see all the great things we're doing. But we are here today specifically on behalf of the STAR Center, which falls under the ACU umbrella. STAR² stands for Solutions, Training, and Assistance for Recruitment and Retention. And we are funded through the Bureau of Primary Healthcare and the Health Resources and Services Administration through a cooperative agreement with 21 other lovely organizations, and we are all considered national training and technical assistance partners. We each have our own area of specialty, and ours here at the STAR Center is all things recruitment and retention. So we are currently in our 12th project year. And the beauty of this program, one of the many benefits, is that all of our resources, all of our training opportunities, this webinar today, our technical assistance, it's all free of charge for you to access to support your health centers. So again, when you have some time, please feel free to visit us at chcworkforce.org, take a look through all of our archives of all the wonderful resources we have available. And of course, always reach out if there's any questions that you have or anything that we can do to support you in your work. This is our lovely STAR Center team. I'm on the end there. Like I said, my name is Sydney. We also have Mariah on the line today as well. She is our back-end tech gal. So if you're having any issues during today's presentation, please feel free to drop her a note in the chat, and she will be more than happy to help you. And on that note, please feel free to type anything that's on your mind in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. So if you have any questions or comments or examples from your work, please feel free to use that. We would love to hear from you. I always like to say, we have a lot of expertise and experience here at the STAR Center, but the real experts in the room are all of you who are doing this work every day. For me personally, my academic and professional background is in conflict transformation, which is part of the reason I am so very excited for, to be presenting on this topic today. Really spent a lot of time, I'm a mediator by training, and really digging into the theory and the practice behind conflict resolution and conflict transformation. So it is a subject that is very close to my heart, and it is something that I really believe in the ability to really transform workplaces, and especially in the healthcare sector, to make really thriving workforces. And that's what we're here to talk about, is the workforce. The workforce is the fuel. We like to use this metaphor at the STAR Center. A health center with a full tank is one that is identifying workforce issues as essential organizational issues, not just nice to haves, and investing the appropriate operational and staffing resources that are needed to support that workforce. We say it all the time, if you had no workforce, you would have no health center. And so we are, delighted to be able to be here and support you as you think about your workforce strategically and how to best support it and have the best operating health centers that you can. And so, this series, we're really focusing on this idea of organizational communication and navigating conflict within your organization. And to start things off, we really like to think about this through the lens of workforce well-being, right? At the STAR Center, we think about well-being as really being kind of broken down into four main pillars. You have physical wellness, emotional wellness, financial wellness, and communication wellness. And really, we need to think about this holistically and all of these different components that contribute to overall workforce well-being. And so when we're talking today about conflict in the workplace, this falls under a couple different categories here. This is communication wellness, and it's also emotional wellness. I think we can all understand that when we are experiencing prolonged or intense or emotional or whatever kind of conflict it may be, it takes an emotional toll. And so we just want to start here and really think about this as an issue of workforce well-being, which of course is going to play into your retention efforts and your recruitment efforts, and really is a critical foundational part of the experience that your employees are going to have at your health center. So first things first, let's try to understand the roots of conflict. There's a lot of resources out there, there's a lot of information out there around conflict, and I think it's really important that we sort of roll the tape back a little bit, take a step back, and really understand what it is we're talking about, why it happens, where it comes from, in order to be able to handle it more effectively moving forward. So I would like to hear from you all, just a quick little brainstorming exercise to get the juices flowing here. I want to know what comes to mind for you when you hear the word conflict. And this is a Mentimeter poll that we have here, so you can go ahead and just scan this QR code on your device. It'll take you right there, or the lovely Mariah will pop in the chat a direct link that you can use to get to the Menti board. Or there's a code that you can use as well if you just want to go to menti.com and type in the code. But follow those instructions. All of your submissions are going to be anonymous. I'll leave that QR code up for just a sec, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and switch over there and see what we all have to say. So what comes to mind when you hear the word conflict? It could be a word, it could be a series of words. No wrong answers. And I'm seeing some great ones already coming in. Problems, yes, misunderstanding, difference of opinion, abuse of power, disagreement. Yes, this is one of those fun word clouds. So the more of you say the same thing, the larger the word will be. So I'm seeing a lot of disagreement kind of coming in here. Dispute, resistance, uncomfortable, tension, refusal to cooperate, opposing views. Yeah, lack of communication, no peace, uncomfortable. Yeah, conflict can be very uncomfortable. Miscommunication, that's another big one. Excellent. All right. Thank you all for humoring me and participating. I want you all to take a moment and just look at this word cloud and all of these words that are popping up. And has anybody notice anything about these words, about this word cloud, about what we're looking at here? Anything that all of these have in common? Let's see. Not positive, all negative. Exactly. Thank you, Kendra. Thank you, Janet. That's exactly where I was going with this. Um, these are, I think, entirely negative connotations, right, that we have with conflict. And that's okay, right? This is pretty common, right? As you can see from all of your similar answers, this is how we typically think about conflict. We think about it being this big, scary, negative thing, disagreements, hidden agendas, opposing views, these sort of like ominous, right? Oh, I see, Christy, thank you. There is one positive, someone says opportunity, and that is a great segue for us. Because I think it's really easy for us to fall into this pattern of really thinking about conflict as being this big, scary, negative thing that we are, forced to sort of deal with all the time. But I am here to sort of break us out of that mindset here today and remind you all that conflict is normal and that conflict can be an opportunity for growth, right? So while all those things you said are valid, they are related to conflict, and conflict can certainly manifest that way. Conflict in and of itself is not actually a bad thing, right? Conflict is inevitable. It is bound to happen. It is part of being a human. And we'll explore a little bit about why and where it comes from in the next few slides. But really, I want us to focus on that last piece that someone just named in the chat of really thinking about conflict as being an opportunity. It is an opportunity for us to learn something new, for us to stretch and grow, for us to confront our own preconceptions about things, and for us to build stronger relationships and work better together. So I want you to sort of keep this in mind as we go throughout the rest of today's presentation and really try to ground ourselves in this idea of flipping the script. Instead of looking at conflict as a scary thing we want to like avoid at all costs, instead looking at it as something that is normal, that is inevitable, and that provides immense opportunity for us to come out of it even stronger on the other side. Because we know conflict happens, right? And we know that in a workplace, particularly at health centers, there's a lot at stake when you're experiencing conflict in the workplace, right? There are significant underlying costs of poorly managed conflicts at work, right? And I want to be very clear, these are not the costs of conflict happening, because it will happen, right? These are the costs when conflict happens and it is not properly or effectively managed, right? That's the difference. Conflict is inevitable. And if we don't handle it well, it will absolutely be all of those negative things that you all just named. But there's a real opportunity to look at it differently. So, what's at stake? If we don't manage conflict in a strategic and thoughtful and open-minded way, we might notice some consequences in the workplace, right? Changes in productivity and efficiency, increased stress, both in work and out of work, right? We all talk about sort of leaving work at work and home at home, but in reality, that's not always so easy to do. So if you're experiencing a conflict at work, especially a prolonged one, of course that's going to, cause some stress for you outside of work as well. Poorly managed conflict is going to put a strain on relationships. It's again going to sort of seep into all of these other areas of your life. And there's physical consequences here too, right? Remember, physical wellness is one of the pillars of wellness as well. And there's a real physical toll to being engaged in a negative conflict for a prolonged period of time. And at the end of the day, if we don't have the mechanisms and tools and skills and strategies to appropriately manage conflict at work, we're going to see a decrease in innovation at work, right? We're not going to be able to do our best work. Now, the flip side of that, if we can productively engage with conflict at work, there's a ton of benefits that we can experience, right? If we have the skills and the systems in place to help our staff to productively engage with conflict at work, we're going to see better work outcomes, not just better resolution of the conflict, but better work outcomes, more opportunities to learn and grow. We'll see improved relationships, higher job satisfaction. And we all know that higher job satisfaction is going to contribute to lower turnover rates, which I think is something we're all striving for, right? And you'll also see that increased trust amongst your team, right? If two people or two groups of people are able to successfully transform and navigate through a conflict together, it is immeasurable the amount of trust that is built, the amount of increased innovation and improved working relationships you're going to see, and just the overall effect on your employee morale and your employee engagement and staff satisfaction is going to be astronomical. So, as we're thinking about this idea of what conflict looks like at work, I got another question for you. Why? Why do we think it happens? Why does conflict happen at work, right? We all work at mission-driven organizations. We all get up in the morning and go to work because we care about the work that we're doing and we care about serving the communities that we serve, right? We all theoretically have the same goals and the same tools available to us. So why does it happen at all, right? We can go right back to that same Menti. Again, you can scan the code or use that same link in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing and hop back over there. And again, as a reminder, all of your answers here are completely anonymous. So please feel free to be candid. Why do we think conflict happens at work? Because people are bored and they want something to do. I don't think that's it. We're human. Yeah. Difference of opinions. Just difference of people. Different styles, different personalities. Change can certainly be sort of a spark to ignite some conflict for some folks. Different visions, a lack of clear expectations. I like that one. Someone was listening to my session last week around the importance of aligning our expectations, right? Everyone is working out of noble intent, and yet conflict happens anyway, right? Past experiences, right? We do not exist as singularities in one moment in time, right? We are informed by all of our past experiences, and we bring that with us everywhere we go, right? Lack of training, emotional dysregulation can certainly contribute to conflict. Creative tensions, right? Again, that's sort of this difference of opinion, different visions, different strategies, lack of compassion, lack of mindfulness. Cultural differences can certainly contribute as well to this kind of broader bucket of just general misunderstanding, right? I'm seeing a lot of this that would fall under that of misunderstanding one another. Different goals, visions, approaches, favoritism, right? Those sort of social dynamics. Because, we know we're all there to do our work, but humans are social creatures. And so we are doing our work in connection with one another. And so relationships sort of can breed conflict sometimes. Yeah, no previously established communication mechanisms. I love it. This person was definitely at my session last week talking, or 2 weeks ago, talking about the importance of communication systems for avoiding those miscommunications, right? Um, Personal stress, confusion, right? This idea of misalignment, miscommunication. Very good. Okay, thank you all for sharing your thoughts here. None of you are wrong. And there actually is a lot of research about this, and there's a lot of sort of different theoretical lenses we could look at to try to understand why it is that conflict happens, right? Let's take a look at these little optical illusions here, right? I want you to take a look at the image on the left of your screen, right? And can somebody put in the chat what they see when they look at that, the black and white image? What do you see at first when you look at that image? A woman looking away, a young girl. Yes. Side profile facing away. Uh-huh. Okay. As you can see, there are several different answers, and we are all looking at the same image, right? Some people see a young woman, some people see an older woman. This is what we call an optical illusion, right? My point here is that we are all looking at the same exact image with our same eyeballs, right? And we are seeing completely different things, right? This is a difference of perspective. And there's a lot of reasons for this, right? I mean, even just this silly little cartoon, right? They are standing at different vantage points, and somebody is saying, this is a 6, and the other person is saying, this is a 9, right? And they are looking at the exact same image, but from different perspectives, right? And so, like, this makes me think of, anyone remember that, like, the blue dress, gold dress fiasco of the internet of the 2010s, right? We are all looking at the same thing, and people are screaming at each other on the internet because they're seeing two completely different things, right? This is normal. This is part of the human experience. We have one objective thing and we're seeing it two completely different ways because our brains are wired differently and we have different life experiences and we have different worldviews and perspectives and physical capabilities and mental capabilities, right? And so if that's the case, of course we're going to have conflict, right? If two people can look at the same thing and see two different things, of course there's going to be conflict, right? And this takes us back to where we started, that conflict is normal. It is inevitable. It is a part of the human experience. And so what's going to make the difference here is how we choose to approach it, right? There's a lot of ways to sort of think about this and a lot of theory around this of is conflict something that is innate within us? Is it our human nature? Is it a product of the way that we are socialized, right? Some people have made the argument that it is simply genetic, right? That it comes down to like Darwinism and evolution, and we evolved to have conflict as a way to survive socially, right? Some people look at this in a more like divine perspective in terms of a fall from grace or things like that, right? Other people will look at this through a social lens and say behaviors are learned from others, and we experience conflict because we are socialized and have learned to be in conflict, right? And then there's even more theories that say conflict is actually something that is intrapersonal, that comes from within ourselves, that being in conflict with others is a source of meaning for ourselves and our own identities, right? And so I'm not here to say if any of these are right or wrong, but this is all to say that there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different theories behind why we experience conflict at all. But the thing that we can certainly agree on is that conflict does happen. It will happen. It is inevitable. And so hopefully by the end of today, and as you continue, on your journeys, we can sort of learn some tools and some skills and some approaches to really turn it into a positive opportunity as opposed to something that is destructive and negative and harmful to ourselves and to our working environments. So when we're thinking about conflict and what it really looks like, there's a lot of types of conflict. Conflict manifests in a lot of different ways, in different settings, and with different people, right? And again, this is just sort of one theory that sort of tries to explain and understand the different types of conflict we experience. And I particularly like this one. This isn't super black and white. Nothing in life, in my opinion, is ever, if maybe rarely, if ever, is truly black and white. I think we all live in the gray all the time. But there are these sort of two buckets of conflict that I think can be helpful as we're thinking about objectively understanding how conflict works, right? And so the first is this idea of identity-based conflict. Identity-based conflicts come from our underlying needs and our values, right? And threats to or frustrations over our identity needs. And those are basic needs. Those are needs like love, belongingness, esteem, power, control, respect, personal growth, self-actualization, right? All of these kind of mutual human needs that we all have. When there is a threat to those needs or underlying values, it can create a conflict. And this we say is sort of intangible, right? It's hard to sort of wrap your arms around something like that because it's really rooted in history, it's rooted in psychology and culture and belief systems and these sort of abstract and complex goals, right? And so if we want to sort of effectively approach and engage with an identity-based conflict, something that is kind of generating from how we understand ourselves as individual people, then we really need to start there and with an interactive approach and a dialogue about those needs and values and promoting having, personal voice and recognition and understanding one another's values, right? We cannot resolve an identity-based conflict without an interactive process to get there, right? One person can't resolve an identity conflict between two people, right? So the other sort of bucket under this theory is this idea of a resource-based conflict, right? And so this is something that is, I think, a little bit more tangible. It's a little more straightforward. This is competition over material or territorial interests, right? Um, you know, there are donuts in the break room. I would love a donut. Mariah and I both walk into the break room at the same time. There's two of us and there's one donut left. There's a resource conflict. We both want the donut, right? It's tangible. There is not enough to go around, and the conflict is over a specific resource. And so, in order to engage with that type of conflict, instead of like interacting to understand each other's needs, which we could do, this might be a more transactive approach, right? Where we have sort of like interest-based and mixed motive bargaining. We might see some more like negotiation in this type of conflict. So this is very general, just in understanding conflict generally, but I really do believe if we can sort of take ourselves out of it for a moment and understand how conflict works and manifests and what it looks like and what it means objectively as a starting point, we can then do the work of self-reflecting and understand how we show up to conflict and have a much better understanding of what we're doing, right? So let's drill down a little bit more specifically because I want to think specifically about what this looks like at work, right? This is another framework, another sort of theory. This comes from the Harvard Business Review's Guide to Dealing with Conflict. And they sort of break this down into 4 buckets of what conflict looks like at work. And so the first idea is this idea of a task conflict, right? And this is what a lot of you named in that word cloud, right? A misalignment of goals, right? So is the goal to, serve X number of patients? Is the goal to, try like roll out a new process, right? And if we're not aligned around like the what are we doing, that's going to create conflict, right? That's a task conflict. The next sort of bucket is this idea of process conflict, and that's the disagreement over the how. So maybe we're aligned on the task. We all know the what that we're trying to do, but we're maybe not in agreement over how we're going to do it and what the process to get from point A to point B should look like, right? And that would be a process conflict, right? At work, we also see this idea of status conflicts, right? That's going to fall very squarely under the identity-based conflict from the previous slide, right? And we get a status conflict when there is an unclear division of decision-making rights, right? So somebody wants to have final say over something, or somebody needs to have final say over something. And there's this sort of misalignment around who gets to have the final say, who gets to make those choices, who gets to approve an idea or a new thing we want to implement, right? And so that would be like a status conflict. And then the last bucket is the relationship conflict. And this is, again, I saw a lot of you sort of lifting this up in the Mentimeter. This is where we see a difference in personal styles, right? This is where we see that more like interpersonal based conflict of, you approached this in this way, I would have approached it in that way, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't know if I like how you work, right? And that's when we start to see this interpersonal relationship based conflict. So Again, not everything is going to fit squarely into one category and not another, but I do think it is helpful to sort of understand that this shows up in a lot of different ways, right? And really, when we're thinking about conflict, I always sort of come back to this idea. If you can tell from my very advanced clip art skills here, this is an iceberg, right? And on top of the water, what we can see, what is visible and perceivable to us is somebody else's position, our positions on something, right? But underneath that position, underneath the surface of the water that we can't necessarily see, we have underlying interests. And underneath those interests, we have underlying needs that are informing those interests, right? So we all have the same needs, more or less, right? Those needs inform our interests, and those interests inform our positions, right? So let me give you an example. Somebody at work comes in and says, I need a raise, right? That's their position, right? That is their ask, right? Or their demand, or however it comes out, right? I need a raise, right? And that's all we can see is I need a raise. Say, well, we don't necessarily have the budget. We'll have to talk about it. I need a raise, right? That is their position, right? But what we might not see unless we can inquire and ask about it is what are the underlying interests, right? And so maybe, and I'm making this up as an example, right? But maybe the underlying interest is my child was just accepted into a special school that has accommodations to meet their needs, and the tuition is significantly higher than his previous school, and I need to be able to cover the difference, right? So my position is I need a raise, and my underlying interest is I need to pay the school fees for my child to get them the type of environment that they need, right? And underneath that interest is my underlying need, right? My need to be a good parent, my need to provide the best opportunities I can for my child, my need to make sure that my child is safe, right? So that's just one example, but we don't see what's going on under the surface there. All we see is that position of I need a raise, right? So if we start to think about it this way and get curious, we can start to ask ourselves, what needs are not being met that have led to this conflict, right? And the reason that this is so important is because those needs are more or less universal, right? That is where we find the common ground, is in our underlying needs. We all need similar things as human beings. Those needs inform our interests, and those interests inform our positions, right? So just, a reminder that there's always a lot more than meets the eye in terms of, the stance that someone is taking in a conflict, right? We need to get curious and want to understand what is driving that stance, right? What are the underlying needs that are not being met that have led to them having this stance and have led to this conflict? Okay, that was a lot. That was like rapid fire crash course introduction to conflict and understanding it objectively. And in this next section, I really want to transition to this idea of building skills around managing conflict, right? But I think before we can look at ourselves and develop some skills for ourselves, it's really important that we first understand, just objectively, taking ourselves out of it, what conflict is, why it happens, and that it really truly is just a normal thing that happens. And it really comes down to how it is managed, right? So that takes us to our next section, building skills to manage conflict. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I do think it is important that we sort of name that our beliefs do not come from nowhere. They do not pop up into our head and that's what we believe, right? There's a lot that goes into sort of this process of forming a belief. And it starts always with observable, objective data. But then there's a whole process of things that happen for us to make meaning out of that data, right? So our brains cannot possibly compute all of the data we are gathering every second of every day through our eyes and our ears and our nose and our touch, right? So that data is selected. It is sort of narrowed down to what our brain deems most important. Meaning and motives are assigned to that data, assumptions are made, conclusions are drawn based on those assumptions, and then actions are taken based on those conclusions, right? So this is a messy and imperfect and very subjective process, and this all happens almost entirely subconsciously within our heads. So I just think it's important to name that some of the things that we hold on to we didn't just arrive there overnight. It really happened through a process of our brains trying to make meaning and understanding out of a very complicated and complex world, right? And so when we're thinking about bridging the divide between maybe ourselves and someone else at work, right? Really kind of putting the onus back on ourselves for a moment to say, it starts with me, right? What observable data informed my beliefs, right? Why am I holding those beliefs and how did I get there? So just a framework and a tool for some of that self-reflection. So as we continue to sort of think about our own personal role in how we show up to conflict, the next concept I think is critically important that we remember. And that is this idea that intention is very much not the same thing as impact. And I want to be clear here. Intention and impact are both real and they are both valid. They are simply not the same as each other, right? So if we work together and I'm going to use sort of like a silly example, but let's say I run into you in the break room and I say, "Oh, you got a haircut," right? The intention that I had in sharing that was perhaps, oh, I want them to know that I pay attention and I notice and I care. I thought your haircut's great. I wanted to like give you a compliment and say that I show you that I pay attention and I care about you, right? Perhaps the impact of me saying that, right? Of me saying, "Oh, you got a haircut," that may be interpreted completely different by the person on the receiving end of that. They might say, "Wait a minute, did she doesn't like my haircut. It must be terrible," or she would have said that she likes it. She just pointed out that I got it, right? Like maybe she just doesn't like me at all, right? And it could have a very negative impact. They could feel really not great about it, right? Just because somebody felt not good about receiving your message, right, doesn't mean that you intended to hurt them with your message, right? On the flip side, just because your intentions were good doesn't mean that the other person's feeling about the impact it had on them isn't valid, right? So we can start to see here how there could be such a big disconnect between the two of these. And it's important to remember that both are true, but they are never going to be the same, right? We all have intentions in doing and saying the things that we do and say. And the impact of those words and actions on other people is not always in line with what our intentions were, right? So it's important to remember that they are discrete things and get curious, right? It's impact is important too, right? Even though I maybe didn't intend to hurt your feelings, I may have hurt your feelings, and that's important that your feelings are hurt, right? And vice versa, your feelings are hurt, but it's important maybe that you understand that I didn't mean that, right? I'm seeing in the chat here, I always tell people to look for the noble intent and communicate it if it didn't come through. And we all need to reflect on implicit biases. Yes, both incredibly true statements, right? And this sort of brings us to where I'm going with this, is really making a habit of assuming good intent, right? Because listen, things are going to happen. People are going to say things or do things that are going to have an impact on you and cause a reaction in you. And before we react, we really need to pause and take a moment and think about that there may have been a misalignment around those intentions, and we may not understand what someone intended in their words or actions, right? So it starts with you and what's coming out from you because that's what you can control. So take a moment to reflect on that. Reflect on how your work, how your actions, how your words affect somebody else, right? Using the active listening and paraphrasing as a tool for a better conversation can be really helpful here. Paraphrasing is going to come up again later on in the presentation. I think it is an incredibly critical tool that we have, but it can really help us, and active listening can help us to get that clarity before we rush to reaction, right? So somebody says something to you, the impact is not good, you feel not good about it, right? Get curious, ask a question and say, "Hey, I heard you say XYZ," that's the paraphrasing part, right? "Can you help me understand what you meant when you said that?" Right? We're getting curious. We're asking to understand what that intention was, right? So again, if you feel challenged or threatened or triggered or however you feel, before assuming that somebody did that on purpose and meant to make you feel that way, inquire to learn ask a question, ask for clarity, right? And you feel free to share your experience. Say, hey, listen, when you said this, it really hurt my feelings. I was wondering if you could, share with me what you meant when you said that. What were your intentions, right? Get curious about the why, right? Stress is going to make us more likely to ascribe intent to somebody else's actions that wasn't really there, right? And so we really want to make a habit to check our own biases, right? Help avoid some of those animosities that can spring up when we are tense, when we are busy, when we are spread thin. We're not always our best selves to react calmly and take a pause, right? So think about your teammates, think about how your actions and your words affect their jobs, right? And make a habit of assuming good intention, right? Which doesn't mean that the impact is not valid. It doesn't mean that your feelings about it aren't important. It just means we should maybe ask some questions to try to understand better before we jump to conclusions. Okay. So intention, not the same thing as impact, right? They are two separate things. Now, when we're in a conflict situation, whether it's something like this, where someone said something that had an impact on you, or it's an identity-based conflict, or a resource conflict, or a task conflict, or a process conflict, right? No matter what it is, we all sort of have hardwired within us these natural tendencies of how we tend to react and show up to conflict, right? And every person is going to have a different relationship to that. And even within yourself as one person, that might look different case by case, right? If I'm having a disagreement with my brother, I'm going to show up differently and have a different reaction of how I engage in that conflict than if I'm at work and I'm having a disagreement with my supervisor, right? So this is not, again, not black and white, not all or nothing. But there is a lot of research around this, and they have divided it into sort of these 5 primary conflict styles because we all react to conflict in different ways, right? And I like the way this is laid out on this graphic here because it sort of has it on this matrix of assertiveness and cooperation. But this is sort of like our knee-jerk reactions, how we tend to like automatically respond to a conflict situation. And more often than not, it's going to fall into one of these 5 categories. And again, it might not be the same all the time. Avoidance is a fairly common one, right? A lot of people are really uncomfortable with conflict. And they're going to sidestep, they're going to postpone the issue, they're going to kind of withdraw from the situation and say, I don't want to fight about it, I'd rather not deal with it at all, right? And that's avoidance. A similar conflict style is this idea of accommodation. It might look similar, but instead of saying like, I don't want to deal with this, like, nope, you're saying, I don't want to fight about it, you just have your way, right? So instead of avoiding it altogether, we're really just sort of yielding to somebody else's point of view, kind of going with what the other person wants, even if it's counter to what you want, because again, you just kind of want to like avoid the conflict. You want to be done with it and say, I don't want to fight about it, just do it your way, right? That's accommodating. On the kind of flip side of that, we have this idea of competitive competition, right? And so that's, somebody who, when they engage in conflict, needs to win, right? I need to win. I need my way or the highway. I need to be right. I don't even care about the substance of what it is the conflict is about. I need to be right and I need to get my way, right? And it's sort of this combative, competitive approach to conflict. Compromise. What I don't love about this graphic is compromise kind of in the middle. A lot of people think that compromise is the best style, right? It's sort of like finding a way to meet in the middle. I give up a little bit of what I want. You give up a little bit of what you want. We both still get a little bit of what we want and we meet in the middle. Sounds great, right? There's actually a better way. And the better way to compromise is the idea of collaboration, right? So compromise sometimes is incredibly valuable, but the problem with compromise is that, yes, we both got a little bit of what we wanted, but we both also missed out on a little bit of what we wanted. Neither of us really got everything we wanted, right? And so when we look at a collaborative approach, this is saying, listen, let's dig a little deeper here. Let's try to identify some of these underlying issues. Let's problem solve and come up with a creative solution that is a win-win for both of us, where we can both find out how to get everything that we want, right? And I think this distinction can get a little confusing sometimes, so I will very quickly give you an example. This is an activity I like to do in person, but basically you'll divide half the room up and tell them that they have to make a pound cake for the bake sale. They need the zest of one lemon to do it. The other half of the room has to make a pitcher of lemonade for the bake sale. They need the juice of one lemon to do it. And then nobody knows what each other needs. You pair them up and say, the stakes are high. This is like the most important bake sale of all time. There is one lemon in the house. You cannot get any other lemons. Figure it out, right? So in that example, a compromise approach would be to cut the lemon in half, right? We each get a little bit, we each lose a little bit, right? In that example, neither person succeeds in their mission. They are not able to make the pound cake recipe and they are not able to make the lemonade recipe. Everybody loses, right? A collaborative approach would require them to ask each other questions and understand, hey, what do you need the lemon for? What are you making, right? Oh, I just need the zest. Oh, I just need the juice, right? And we can come up with a creative solution where I zest it first, hand it to you, you juice it, we both win, right? So that's the difference between collaboration and compromise. And the point, like, there's a lot of great tools and resources out there for you to sort of take a little quiz and do a little self-evaluation to understand your own personal conflict style. But there's two reasons that I think this is really important. So number one, understanding your own tendencies is going to give you a level of self-awareness that will enable you to make different or better choices the next time you're in a conflict situation, right? So if you know about yourself that like you really are uncomfortable in conflict and you tend to be really accommodating, maybe especially at work, right? Maybe the next time there's a conflict and you start engaging with it and you feel that gut reaction to just say, okay, your way, you maybe now have an opportunity to pause and check in with yourself and say, wait a minute, am I really happy with this outcome or am I just being accommodating, right? Self-awareness is huge, right? The other reason I think this is really important is because it can be helpful to remember that somebody else may have a really different conflict style than you, right? So let's say you get in a disagreement with a coworker and then they like are literally avoiding eye contact with you in the hallway for the next 3 weeks, right? Remember, intention, impact. Their intention might just be they're really uncomfortable in conflict and they have an avoidant conflict style. But the impact that has on you, I can't imagine would be very good, right? And so you might be sitting there, this is what we do. We start to make up stories in our head to connect the dots, right? And you might say, oh my goodness, they're really so mad at me. They don't even want to be my friend anymore. They can't even look me in the eye. I must have hurt them so badly, right? That might not be what's going on at all. That other person might just have an avoidant conflict style and just like not feel capable of showing up and talking to you about it, right? And so that's the sort of other benefit here is this empathy building piece to try to understand that everybody shows up to conflict in a different way. And maybe this person who it feels like they're being really combative and they won't let it go and they need to get their way, maybe that's because they have a competitive conflict style. And maybe that informs how we choose to engage with it differently, right? So we all react in different ways. There is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. Some of these approaches are a little bit more productive and effective than others, but this is not to shame anybody. It's just so that we can sort of understand and start to build some self-awareness about how we show up and some understanding about how someone else might show up. Okay. Again, real kind of high level understanding ourselves in conflict kind of stuff. Going to transition in this next section to talking a little bit more tangibly about some things we can do to have more productive conversations when they are difficult conversations. Difficult conversations happen, right? These are the three, kind of key skills that are laid out. I really like this book. It's called Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. It's a little older, but it all still holds true. Again, paraphrasing is a really, really powerful communication tool, right? Paraphrasing is basically just repeating back what you heard someone say, but in your own words. And there's a lot of benefits to doing this, right? It provides you an opportunity to check your understanding of what they just said and avoid the miscommunication before it ever even happens, right? It kind of builds in a moment of pause, especially if someone has said something that has triggered something in you, kind of builds in a moment for you to pull back a little bit before you have a reaction. And it also forces the person who said the thing to maybe reflect on what they said, because maybe it came out in a way and that's not what they meant at all, right? So you paraphrase back. That's typically something like, okay, so what I heard you say is, right? Or it sounds like what you mean is, right? Or, I'm hearing, right? And you're just, it might sound silly, but I swear doing it in practice, paraphrasing back what someone said is going to really transform the way that you have difficult conversations. And it's going to sort of avoid a lot of the messy back and forth before it even starts, right? If you say something and I am offended by it, remember, I want to check your intentions before I just lean into the impact it had on me and react. And so I might say, wait a minute, did you mean to say XYZ? And the person on the other might say, oh no, that's not what I meant at all, right? And it gives you an opportunity to clear it up before it ever happens, right? Inquiring, right? This is that idea of inquiring to learn, getting curious, asking questions, right? Do not make assumptions about someone's intentions. Do not make assumptions about why someone reacted the way that they did. Get curious and ask questions. And then lastly, this idea of reframing. Reframing can be so valuable, especially if we're sort of stuck in a negative framework about something, to say, we all worked so hard on this project and it was a failure, right? And say, hey, how can we maybe reframe this conversation? And instead of thinking about it as a failure, maybe let's lean into where there's opportunity for us to grow and do things differently next time. Or maybe let's reframe and first focus on the things that did go well, right? And where there's opportunity to do better. So just want to sort of keep these in mind in terms of your personal skill development, that these are 3 that you can keep coming back to over and over and over again, and you will see a difference in the quality of conversations that you're happening if you lean into these 3 skills. Even more specifically and tangibly, when we're having a difficult conversation, there are some words and phrases I would recommend that you avoid, right? Things like always and never and the truth, right? All 3 of those are so rigid and black and white. And I think we all understand from our lived experience that things very rarely are always, and things very rarely are never, right? And the truth is sometimes a very abstract concept, right? And so we want to sort of avoid these absolutisms, right? If you're having a challenge with somebody on your staff who continually shows up to work late, right? And you decide to have a difficult conversation with them about it, and you sit them down and you say, hey, listen, you are always late for work and you are never here on time. And that's the truth, right? That's probably not going to go very well, right? And so we want to avoid the always and the never and just be as specific and as possible and say, hey, listen, I noticed that you were, late 3 times in the last 2 weeks, right? This is the impact it has on the team. This is the expectations moving forward. How can I support you to make that happen, right? I also recommend avoiding the word but, right? I think we all have had this experience where it's like everything before the but becomes negated, right? You did a really great job on that, the last thing that you were working on, but, this other part didn't really go so well, right? We're not so likely to really hear the first part after the but. And so this is a really easy one. I encourage you to kind of take this approach in every aspect of your life, and really see what happens when you replace the word but with the word and. I promise you, your sentences will still make sense. Hey, listen, that part of the project really, you did really good job on this part. And, this part, I think we could have done better, right? Because both are true, right? And but sort of implies that one is true and one is not, right? So try to switch but for and, see what happens. And then lastly, try to avoid, like seeking agreement instead of seeking to understand, right? So wouldn't you agree? Or does that make sense, right? We're sort of kind of putting the answer in someone else's mouth. And so instead we want to, try to find that mutual understanding and say, what do you think, right? So again, just quick little tidbits there to think about improving your conversations. There's a few steps we can follow, right? When we're having to kind of steel ourselves to have a tricky conversation. Prepare yourself mentally, check your purposes, right? Really ask yourself if this is something that's worth raising. Try to maintain your objectivity. Do not root in your own story. Try to really lean into that curiosity, exploring their story and yours. Don't just be married to your own narrative of what happened, right? Really get curious, inquire to learn, ask questions, listen to understand, right? And then lastly, problem solve. So creating options that are going to meet both of your interests and both of your needs, right? Remember that iceberg, right? We all have interests, we all have needs, and how can we come up with a solution that is going to, meet as many of those for both of us as possible? Okay. Moving quick here because there's so much to cover and I could talk about this stuff all day. So we started with thinking about conflict objectively, transitioned into thinking about building our own skills around how we as individuals show up to conflict. And then the third real piece of this puzzle in my mind is thinking about how we're investing in the organizational systems and strategies to support the effective use of those personal skills, right? So there are instances in which a third-party intervention may be an appropriate sort of avenue to explore a conflict, particularly if it's a complex or emotional interpersonal conflict. And so just a few questions to self-reflect. If you think that this might be where things are at, do we need a third-party intervener? Are we not getting anywhere on our own? Have we tried to get somewhere on our own before we've tried to pull someone else in? Is that going to help? Is it going to make matters worse? I think this is the most important one. Do we both agree that a third party may be helpful? Do we want it to be formal or informal? Who might be the most appropriate person to do that for us in this situation? What it really is going to depend situation to situation. But listen, conflict happens, and sometimes we're using all of our skills and we're trying our best and we're just not getting anywhere, and the conflict is not resolving or transforming at all. In which case you might need to pull somebody else in to help be like that neutral third-party person with a fresh set of ears and no motivation, no motives, right? Like a neutral person, this should always be. But just a reminder that that is a tool that is available. And there really is a role for leadership in all of this too, right? 50%, 7% of managers say that they are fully responsible for managing and resolving team conflicts, right? That's a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of management, right? And so there's some things we can think about investing in the skills of our leaders and our managers to better equip them to navigate conflict. And this is some more research that sort of suggests that there are these 4 core competencies a leader needs to navigate conflict most effectively. Right? Self-awareness, we've talked a lot about that today. Self-regulation, right? Recognizing and managing your own personal reactions so that you can remain calm, you can engage strategically, right? Strong social conflict skills, deep listening, balancing advocacy and collaboration, checking biases, helping leaders reach constructive solutions. Situational adaptivity, which is very important, right? Knowing how to tailor strategies to fit different types of conflict, when to lean in, when to step back, adjust for cultural nuances, that sort of flexibility is going to be really critical. And then this last piece around systemic wisdom, like allowing leaders to address chronic and deeply rooted conflicts by really looking at this bigger picture, embracing the complexity, learning from past successes, from past failures, right? And so if we're thinking about your workplace culture, if you're noticing that there's a lot of conflict and you think perhaps there's an opportunity to do some skill development and competency development for the people in leadership roles within your organization, this is where I would suggest you start, right? These are the things that are going to make for really successful leadership when it comes to navigating conflict. And we know that, impactful leadership is sort of this magic mix of empathy and humility and vulnerability and the ability to model these behaviors and this approach to conflict resolution that we want to see amongst our staff, right? We say this a lot at the STAR Center, that leadership really needs to reflect the organization's values in its day-to-day actions. You really need to model those values and behaviors that you wish to see, right? And aligning your health center's mission with the beliefs and values of your workforce is really critical, right? There needs to be a give and take there to ensure that alignment. So all of this is to say, and I had sort of raised this in our first session of this series, but when we're thinking about investing in strong organizations and strong organizational cultures, we really can't look at one side of the coin, right? We could pour a lot of time and energy and resources into building the individual skills of our employees, which is great and valuable. But the best approach is to really take this twofold approach to both invest in individual skill building and investing in the codified systems and channels and organizational norms that are necessary to support those individual skills, right? It's not enough to say we have a 3-page protocol on how to deal with conflict at work, and we have all these HR practices, and this is who you go to, and this is what the process looks like. That's fine and dandy. But if people don't have the opportunity to really engage more productively in conflict personally, you're going to see less value from that, right? And vice versa. So really think about this holistically, thinking about investing in individual skill building and also investing into the organizational systems, channels, and norms that are going to support that, right? These are some questions I want you to sort of, kind of take home with you and really think about as you return back to work at your organizations, right? How do people engage with conflict at your organization? What are the norms? What's the culture around that? What does it look like, right? When people experience conflict, because I know it's happening, you know it's happening, we're humans, right? And then, also think to yourself, do you know who to reach out to for support if you're navigating a conflict, right? It's really important that you think about that before you're in conflict, right? For example, if you are having a disagreement with your direct supervisor, right? And it feels like you're not getting anywhere, and it feels like it's starting to kind of drift into the more like personal relational aspect of conflict as opposed to like a task or process aspect, and you're feeling stuck. You don't want to be in that moment and say, I don't know who to go to for help. I don't want to go over their head. I don't want to gossip to someone over here. I don't know what to do, right? It's hard when you're in that situation to think about that. So I want you to think about it in advance, right? Have a kind of a plan in place. Have really clear norms around that. Is HR a resource that's available for that? Is, team leads, managers, C-suite leadership, who within your organization should you reach out to, and make sure that that's clear for everyone. Make sure those expectations are aligned and that they know there are resources and support available should they need help navigating a conflict, right? I will leave you all with this final quote from the conflict intelligent leader because I really think it sort of sums up this whole approach pretty well, right? By embedding conflict resolution skills throughout the ranks, leaders can ensure that their organizations thrive even in the face of internal tensions. That means moving beyond seeing conflict as something to be avoided and framing it as a potential source of energy, innovation, and growth. That shift begins with creating safe, facilitated spaces for difficult conversations about sensitive issues in order to normalize the idea that conflict, when handled well, drives improvement rather than destruction. Right? So it's all about our approach here, right? It's all about thinking about conflict, flipping the script, thinking about it as a positive opportunity, and creating the spaces within our organizations where we can engage in the process in a productive and healthy way. Okay. I could talk about this all day, but I think I will leave you with that for our 1 hour session. I would love to hear from you all. Please feel free to put in the chat if you have any questions or comments or musings, anything you'd like to share. And while you're doing that, I will encourage you to sign up for our newsletter so you can hear about all the wonderful things happening at the STAR Center and all of our other great training opportunities. And in just a moment, you should have a little evaluation popping up on your screen. There it is. Please take a moment to fill that out. You can consider that your ticket out the door. I know we sometimes get some survey fatigue, but we really appreciate your participation. It's helpful for us to sort of understand what you all thought about it and, inform our programming next time. So please stay in touch. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but I will keep it open for another moment if anybody has any questions or thoughts. And I want to thank you all so much for your attention and for joining. Thank you, Shalonda. We will definitely be sending the slides out and our info is right there. So if you have any follow-up questions or you pop up in the middle of the night and say, wait a minute, Sydney said that thing and I don't understand what she said, you feel free to reach out and we're happy to talk more about it.